Welcome to Becoming the GC, the podcast that dives deep into the journeys of general counsels and chief legal officers, uncovering the insights and strategies that help define their success. Hosted by Joe Schul, founder of Inside Counsel Academy. We share real-life stories and practical advice from successful GCs, guiding you on your journey to the top. Tune in and discover what it takes to become the exceptional legal leader your organization needs.
Hi, I'm Joe. Today's guest is Hemang Shah. Hemang is a partner at Jones Day. So why is he on the show? Because he was once one of the youngest general counsels of a very large publicly traded company in Australia. He then returned to private practice with a unique perspective as a result of that experience. Stick with me to the end where I'll share some of my thoughts on the episode. This show is sponsored by Inside Counsel Academy, where in-house counsel go to elevate their careers while enhancing their lives. And also by General Counsel West, a law firm that supports GCs of healthcare companies and their teams with an inside counsel mindset. Hemang Shah served as General Counsel of Gloucester Coal, listed on the Australian Securities Exchange, where he was one of the youngest general counsels in the ASX 200. He's now a partner at the global law firm Jones Day, where he advises a diverse global client base on complex cross-border transactions and strategic legal matters. With a particular focus on the technology and healthcare sectors, he brings a wealth of experience and a unique blend of legal expertise and commercial acumen in navigating high-stakes multinational issues. Hemang, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Joe. I'm very pleased to be here.
Now, Hemang, you have an advantage because at the time we're recording this, for me, it's still the workday. For you, it's the weekend. Tell us where you're recording from.
Good question. So I'm based in Sydney, Australia, but work with all parts of the globe. So I'm pretty familiar with most time zones, and have the luxury of being able to fit in things like this, early in the morning in my day, so I can reserve the rest of it, sort of do as I please.
Great. Now, Hemang is our first guest who's a law firm partner, but who spent an earlier part of his career as a general counsel. So I want to go back to that point in time. And even before that, what inspired you to pursue a career in law?
Yeah, great question, Joe. So in terms of, I studied 2 degrees, as a lot of people have done. I did commerce and law. I was debating whether to go into investment banking or commercial law. I was always going to do sort of the commercial front end side of law if I was to do it. And I found law very interesting because, it carries centuries of tradition, but it always evolves and, constantly meets the challenges of our modern world. So I found it, an interesting perspective on how the history of law evolves to meet, the current needs of business. And in the front end space, how to apply it in a commercial, aspect to achieve, modern day commercial outcomes, whether they be, in relation to environmental crises to emerging technologies. So, I found it fascinating and it turned to prove true.
Now, did you grow up in Australia?
Yeah, I sure did. I was born in India and grew up in Australia for most of my life. Okay.
And so how does it work? Do you get an undergrad degree and then a law degree, or does it work differently there?
Yeah, it does work a bit differently. Look, in my case, at my time, the most popular way of doing it was to do a concurrent double degree. So you kind of hedge your bets. You do 2 degrees. I was doing a Bachelor of Commerce majoring in finance and a Bachelor of Law, and was quite torn as to which sort of pathway to choose. And then you try and get some work experience and see what your natural fit is. Get the right job, secure it, get to travel like all good Australians do for a period of time before you start as a graduate, and then get stuck straight into it. So it's unlike the US system where it's a bit more sequential. You do it concurrently here.
And then what's the common path for a law graduate?
Yeah, so you do your practical legal training. You sit an exam, which is a lot easier than the New York bar and other bars, and you work. You get your 2 years experience as required at a law firm to become an unqualified lawyer and continue to work in law. I guess the nuance between, for example, Australia and the US is in the litigation space, we have, a pathway for lawyers and a pathway for barristers. And the barristers spend most of their time advocating in court. Lawyers spend most of their time in, law firm acting for, a range of clients.
Okay. So you started in a law firm?
Started in a law firm, always been in a law firm or as a general counsel.
And then what brought you to an in-house role?
It's a good question. So it was as much happenstance as anything. I was working very hard as an M&A lawyer in a large domestic firm. Had a tremendous year. Had a bit of time off after doing a house renovation, buying a house, doing a house renovation, and having a baby. Everyone seems to do those three things at the same time. And when I came back, I was asked to go on secondment to a Gloucester Coal ASX 200 company to help them with a capital raising and some M&A. And the day before I joined secondment, they sort of had a refresh of management. There was a new CEO, new deputy CEO, the CFO had just been promoted. And we had a really good time working together. And I got to know the board and we got to see them through, the largest M&A deals that they'd done and a major capital raising. We all got along really well. And towards the end of the secondment, the CEO sat me down and said, well, do you want to be general counsel? So, I was 31 years old, 6 years into practicing law and, objectively probably wouldn't have been the candidate that someone would have considered for such a senior role. But because I've, been in the trenches with them for, 3-4 months working on these deals, that we kind of realized we liked each other and worked well together. And I got that opportunity.
And had they had a prior general counsel?
No, they didn't. They were mostly sort of had an outsourced model, which you'd be familiar with. So they didn't have a prior general counsel, and they also wanted sort of a management reset. They wanted, fresh people who didn't live, could sort of change the way that the business was performing from how it was historically without feeling like they had, a vested interest in protecting what was done previously.
And what was your experience sitting on the management team?
I mean, it was tremendous. It was a huge learning opportunity. I had the deputy CEO had been the head of iron ore at BHP. The CEO was an amazing entrepreneur. The CFO, knew the financials inside and out. For me, it was a huge step forward. Multi-dimensional. I was managing litigation. I was dealing with site-based issues. Moving away from the core, it was probably the steepest learning curve I've ever had. And I was in, rooms by myself that, traditionally I would have, a bunch of colleagues with. So it was very different, but a really, really fulfilling challenge.
What did you do to stay on top of that learning curve?
Yeah, look, good question. I mean, I think as an, M&A lawyer, I was used to tackling new issues, having to, outsource to the right specialists, frame them and then apply sort of a commercial lens to it to deliver to clients. I lent into, trusted relationships. I, spent lots of time with the business to understand it as well as I could, as quickly as I could. I'd go. I went to every site. I spent time with all the business leads to try and, get a handle on it. I would go and seek counsel from mentors and mentor relationships I'd previously had and just had an open mind and worked. Probably the number one thing I did, I worked harder than I'd ever worked before to make sure I, brought the best version of myself to everything.
Right. How confident were you heading into the role?
I mean, I would not have put my hat in the ring for a role like that, having not done it. In at least in Australia, you kind of don't get offered a role unless you've performed something similar before in something like that. So the confidence I had was probably having worked with the team and seen how we worked and seen what they expected of me already. It was kind of a try on both sides, a try before you buy scenario.
Right. Then how did that role evolve and how did you find yourself back at a law firm?
That in itself is quite an interesting question. So I started in this company. The market was strong. It was coal mining. I'd never actually worked in coal before. Done a lot of tech and healthcare and diversified businesses. And the day I joined, the share price was $13.02 in 2011, and the commodity prices dropped. And essentially, by the end of the year, the share price was worth about $2-3. Significant drop, significant issues. We had a knock on the door another company it was much larger than us, about 3 or 4 times larger than us, wanted to use us to merge and list onto the Australian Securities Exchange. And then we ended up working on a merger, which, was my sweet spot. It was the one thing that I could do better than anyone else in the organization, because it's all I did before I joined. And so we saw the merger through, Joe, which was a huge amount of work. We got consumed by a bigger company. I had to write down my job as a merger synergy. So, to show the benefits of the merger, the general counsel of the smaller company is going to get removed, the CFO is going to get removed, all of those things. And then they had to decide, who would be general counsel on both sides. And then I became general counsel of a much larger company called Coal, which remained listed and was majority Chinese owned, albeit still listed. And I was there for 2 years, learnt a lot. It was in a down market, but I kind of floated into both companies unintentionally. I loved the work. I loved the people. I worked for 3 different CEOs, but it wasn't the sector I necessarily wanted to be in. And it was a sector that if you spent a very, very long time in, then you couldn't leave. So I went back to practice with a practitioner who'd been doing a lot of work with our company, and just decided I was going to use that as a base to reset and decide, what do I want? What do I want to do? And the management team that I'd started with on that journey was no longer there by virtue of the merger at the end of the journey. So that aspect of things wasn't holding me back, and I wanted to adjust the sector that I focused on as well.
Wow. What was that transition like back into a law firm?
Yeah, look, it was very different. I kind of got used to, having to make decisions without all of the information, all circumstances, and without all of the resources to analyze every possible risk. And then to have to sort of, step that back to being, more comprehensive, more thorough, having to be across everything, playing, that role, which is sometimes, hey, I want you across everything. I want, you're an insurance policy for us. You need to make sure everything's sorted and you've thought it all through. So that was a bit of an adjustment on that basis. Obviously, some of my clients and relationships, I'd sort of had to let go of as part of going in-house, but I had new ones that I could lean into. So it was very interesting. And the firm I joined was curious about my learnings and my perspective on things, which was great.
What did you miss about being in-house when you returned to the law firm?
Look, I love being close to the business. I really enjoyed learning. I would bribe the CFO and say, I'll buy you lunch once a month and you need to teach me about the management presentations that you're giving the board every month so I can understand them more and the accounting issues that you're presenting. I got to go to work with the smartest commercial people and see how they made decisions, evaluated problems, while standing alongside them. And in-house, I just felt, a couple more degrees of separation from that. That was the aspect of things I missed the most.
How does that experience inform how you provide services from the law firm?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, as soon as I meet a new client, or if I say, I'd love to spend a day, half a day coming and visiting you and getting to know your business, what it is and what that might be. So, I've done some work for a port operator, went to the site and I sat in a crane while they were taking out, cargo containers from the ship. For technology businesses, I've gone and sat, with their developers and seen, what that was like. For a quantum computing client, I've gone to the lab and seen what they were like and asked lots of questions of the business and understood what makes them special, what keeps them up at night, build a sort of trusted relationship with the business where the business sees you wanting to know them and invest in the relationship. The other thing, probably one of the biggest things, is I show compassion. I remember before I went in-house as a general counsel, I must confess I would judge legal teams and say, in private practice, we paid top dollar, we give top service, and your legal service, your legal function is not performing very well. You know, people in private practice sometimes look down on legal functions. It's like, oh, you made all these mistakes and your precedents aren't very good. And I learned maybe they're on the journey and they're in the earlier phase of building up the legal capacity. So I showed compassion and said, I know you have a day job. I know this is probably in addition to your load. You know, how can we help? And rather than judging, I, sought to help. The last thing, probably the most important, Joe, is I invest in relationships, because I remember how lonely I was as a general counsel, and sometimes how much I felt like a checkbook rather than a person to people. And so now I try and say, how can I invest in you? What do you personally need? How can, the firm help you grow?
Yeah, when I think about that, I mean, it's almost a luxury as an outside lawyer to get to be excellent within I don't want to say narrow, but a narrow area of expertise. And when you're a general counsel, you don't get that luxury. And so you feel the same desire for excellence, but you're trying to maintain that over a much broader swath.
I completely agree. And this is probably the best example. We have clients whose legal sophistication, for example, a bank, is very high. And their return to their investors for the last year or two is reasonable. And we have clients who are fast growing tech companies who've increased in value in maybe tenfold in the last 2 years. And you go in there for the fast growing tech company, it might be worth 500 million now, might be worth $1 billion. It's gone through rapid growth, and everything is wrong. Everything is bad. And having been in-house, I go and say to them, you know what? You did the most important thing, which was to be as successful as you could be. You applied all of your cash to growth and development to become the value that you are now. And now you have the cash to go and fix things. And there's going to be lots of things that are wrong. And that's not a reflection on you. That's just a reflection on, your fast growth. And now we can go and spend the time to fix them. And I think if I always say to my juniors, like, don't judge clients. Look at the return that they've given to their investors. That's the primary judge of success of a business. And then our job is to determine what kind of support they need from a legal perspective, having regard to where they are.
That's great advice. What do you do to build relationships with, is it typically with GCs? Are they your clients? Or like what percentage of clients are you sort of working with directly with the business people and there is no inside law department versus there's a GC and a law department of some sort?
That's a good question. So I tend to usually, this is a good question. So almost all clients except 3 have internal legal departments. 2 are growing tech companies and they're about 200 million valuation, and they've stayed in the outsource model. One's a company I just worked with for so long, so they do a fair bit of outsource. They're worth about $1 billion, but most of the time there's a GC. My personal desire is to also build relationships with the commercial team. But what I have learned from being in-house is initially to only go through the GC, to build a relationship with the GC. I remember when I was a general counsel, how private practitioners would go and meet my CEO without telling me. And the CEO would be like, oh, I just went and met Joe. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, Joe didn't tell me he was meeting me. So my primary objective is for the general counsel to see me as an extension of them, to build the trust. I ask permission to build relationships with the commercial team and ask them how involved they would like to be or not, or whether they'd like to just, me to be the only channel to them, and then do it accordingly. Now, the most successful relationships I have, the general counsel, I've had one where the general counsel emailed the board and said, climbing, frozen waterfalls in Russia, I won't be contactable. Hemang's your contact while I'm gone. That's ultimately the relationship I want to be on, in, one where they're resource constraint and trust me to talk to the business without them being on the phone. But that takes time. So to answer your question, Joe, depending on the type of relationship I have, the level of exposure, it's a varied experience. But the end goal is to have that trusted relationship where, you can work in parallel rather than having to work, in series.
Beautiful. How did you decide where you wanted to practice when you returned to private practice?
Yeah, look, that's a good question. I was working with one of the leading corporate firms in the country and went and joined them. I was working with the chair of company at the time of that firm, and he moved to the firm I'm at now, Jones Day, about 10 years ago, and said, Hemang, the grass is greener. This place will suit your personality. You should come over. It's international. It's commercial. It's got a flat structure. It's got lots of opportunity. It's going to really suit you. It took me 3 years to believe him because everyone says that, and I always wanted. I mean, our largest trading partner in Australia is the US by a significant factor, but most of the law firms in Australia at the time were UK headquartered at the internationals. And that's maybe because of a factor of our legal system coming more from the UK than the US. And so I, leapt at the opportunity working at a, US originated firm, for the sectors that, a couple of the sectors I'm most interested in, healthcare and technology. It's a very, very strong fit. And, I think the firm culturally also suited me significantly. And I came over and I've been here for 7 years and I've been exceptionally happy. I've had the pleasure of working with a whole bunch of people in Australia and overseas, including yourself. It's been tremendous.
Right on. How often do you travel to the States? And is that different pre-COVID versus post-COVID?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I was in the States 3 times last year. I'll be there in May. I do like the Pacific time side of things because the time frame overlap is very good. But I'm someone who likes to meet people and to spend time with people face to face. So I, trying to balance obviously the team and whatever not, I do like to spend lots of time anywhere. And the other trick I do, we have 40 offices around the world, is when we go for family holidays, I usually try and just tack on a week working out of, whatever office is nearby, wherever we're holidaying. And
now, does the family get an extra week of vacation while you're doing that?
That's right. Yeah. I mean, we had exceptionally long summer vacations. They can, our summer vacation over December, January can, extend as far as 7-8 weeks. So I can't take that much. I can't be away from work, personally or professionally for that long. So it's a nice balance. And I've worked out of the Mexico City office. I've worked out of the Singapore office. I've worked out of the Dubai office, and I've got to know everyone there. And it's just an added benefit. It's a real treat.
Right.
And the other thing I do is with clients is whenever they're overseas, I say you should work from one of our offices. If you're out on business or you need to do a couple of days, why don't you go hang out at our office and work out of there? Because I thoroughly enjoy it. So and they do that, and they enjoy it as well.
Now, there are certainly things that you learn from being in-house that have served you well. Now, being an outside lawyer, you've learned from that experience and applied it. What if you were to go back in-house? What would you do differently now, having had this experience, over the past how many years since you've been GC?
That is a great question. I was, very, very young when I started. I would focus on a few different things. The first thing that I learned later in my phase, like while I was in-house, probably the last year, was I spent all of my time serving everyone else's emergencies. So people say, there was a lot of fire drills. This has happened, that has happened. And maybe 30% of those were genuine emergencies. And 70% of those were people just trying to ensure that you were doing what was at the top of their inbox. And
well said.
So I look back, and I look back and I thought, how has the legal team improved? I've improved, focused on improving everyone else's business functions. How has the legal team improved? And so what I would do differently is set goals and objectives. For example, I talk to clients and I say, how do we work together to get your legal department, let's say 10 or 15% better, this year compared to last year? And then if we keep on that and you've got a compound return, it'll be 50% better in a few years' time. I taking that perspective to things is something, because I just literally ran around doing what I was told was the most important thing at any time, but that wasn't necessarily the most important thing to me.
Do you ever get a desire to do it again?
I definitely do. The reason why I'm slightly cautious about that is because of the mergers we went through. I went through over a very short period. I worked with 3 CEOs: the CEO who hired me, the CEO we inherited through a merger, and then the CEO that replaced that inherited CEO. And Joe, I had 3 exceptionally different experiences. In all instances, the expectation was, as a general counsel, through a merger or a new CEO, that there's every probability that you're going to, have to be looking for another job because they might have a preferred person, or your way of working might not reconcile with theirs, or they might need to come and be seen to be making some changes. So that was probably the bit that gave me the most pause about being in-house, was just that uncertainty that the role and person I was working with was not necessarily it. Whereas the advantage for me in private practice is I'm able to build long relationships with people, and they tend to, when they move around, bring you into the new roles. I mean, that's why there's that risk of, when you get a new CEO, they bring new people in. They also bring in new outside counsel. So I don't miss that side of things, but I miss being seen to grow the business and hang out with I just love, hanging out with the business and learning what they do and how they do it and how they approach that. And ironically, you start seeing how you can apply that, to yourself or the legal function. And you can add so much more value when you understand what the commercial drivers and risks the business sees and apply the legal, law to that. And I terribly miss that.
Tell me more about your current practice. What kind of projects?
Yeah, look, great question. So we obviously, there's your traditional, I'm an M&A lawyer, so do equity capital markets and strategic work and advice. So there's the your bulk standard work, domestic M&A, domestic capital markets, which, you've traditionally done, keep the lights on. There's always a few pet projects. When I look at the composition of clients, there's a lot of great companies that have started in Australia and are starting in Australia that are global. The 2 largest mining companies in the world are Australian. The largest media company in the world is Australian. The largest ear implant company in the world, all originate in Australia. So the focus at the moment, Joe, has been to do things that involve a global perspective. The sweet spot is to help businesses that are ready for global expansion to expand and facilitate that. We're now, and knowing who in the firm can do that, picking the right person and the right price point for what they need, helping them, use the firm's brand in the jurisdictions they wish to grow to help, facilitate their growth or solve their problems. And the more I do that, the more adept I become at doing that. And to be frank, that's becoming a large part of the role, actually, which is the most exciting bit.
Yeah, I would imagine that it's at a firm like you're at, in the international scope, it's important to network within the firm as much as it is to network outside the firm.
Absolutely. In lots of regards, understanding who does what, who's going to be the right fit. I say, for example, to an Australian, private equity client that's wanting to do a global deal, I said, well, here's a few folk from who work for different private equity clients in their jurisdiction. So let's try and get you the practitioner that sort of practices for in a similar area, over there. It's important to, I think, in 2 folds. One, to know what people do, but the other thing for me, probably the biggest one, is to refer enough work out so that you motivate people to prioritize, your work, your clients, and what's going on. And so you get to a point where if you give someone enough work, they'll do something small for you. They'll do a favor for you. They'll help a client out, in a way that they might not otherwise do so. Even though the firm naturally does that, human nature is, if I'm getting lots and lots of flow from you, I'm now going to invest in our business development relationship and help you with your business development because that's my business development. So that's probably the firm will always say yes. If people see the fruits of that labor, then that they lean into it.
Makes sense. How does the firm promote that networking and getting to know each other?
Oh, look, great question. I mean, the firm is unusual. It's one global partnership, a hire based. We're all partners of the same partnership. It's one conflict model, one billing model, one IT model. So,
Across all jurisdictions. That is
all
unusual, right?
jurisdictions.
Because some of the firms that do that, it's not that way.
The Sydney office lease, we have 4 offices in Australia. All of the office leases are in the name of our hire-based partnership. It's fun. And so the firms, I think people are driven by metrics. So the metrics of the firm complement, working with each other. The firm promotes it through initiatives. We have an annual conference every 2 years where we all get together. They make sure that different people from different jurisdictions are involved in different initiatives. Globally, last year, Australia was asked to go to New York and present a plan for Australia and what we would like from the firm and what we think we can contribute to the firm, so that everyone could, at an advisory committee meeting, hear from that and report back to their areas about what they can do with Australia. I think the firm does a lot to facilitate it, but realistically, the foundation and fabric of the firm facilitates it. And most people in today's world, they're curious about what's happening. If it's easy to find out and collaborate with someone in another jurisdiction, it's quite enjoyable. So, I think people have a natural curiosity to wanting to do it as well.
Has it accelerated as a result of everybody's adeptness now at telecommunications and video conference?
Absolutely. And I think it's also it allows you to travel and, kind of meet your objectives and still service people. And it allows you to connect in a massive way. So, if you don't want to sleep and want to wake up at 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m., the firm's always got something going on at all hours that you can participate in. And, which is fantastic. And Australia usually gets the wrong end of the stick, between Europe and North America. But, it's been a massive shift change, video conferencing. And it also allows you to work on things you might not otherwise naturally be able to work on as well.
Yeah.
So for me, it's been a complete game changer in a positive way.
Yeah, great development out of an unfortunate, set of circumstances.
Sure.
How many partners at the firm?
The 800 partners, Joe.
Okay.
So
every 2 years, you guys get together somewhere in person.
Yeah, all of us. It was last few times I've been in Miami. In February next year, it's going to be in San Diego.
Oh, great. Okay, good. Hemang, what are you most looking forward to in the future here?
I think that everything's become a lot more fast-paced. I think people have realized the value of good leadership, good advice, deep relationships in navigating the challenges we're experiencing now. And I'm looking forward to being part of that. I'm looking forward to facilitating people's personal and corporate journeys, and to sort of integrate that in a global way and provide global solutions that, frankly, allow me to grow and understand and be more relevant as well as, anyone else.
Well, you're in a great spot for it. I know my clients have benefited from the work that you've done in the past and continuing. So I appreciate that. I really appreciate your being on the show, and have a great weekend, which has already started.
Thanks, Joe. It's been an absolute pleasure. I love everything you do. And thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed our time with Hemang. I know I did. A few key things I'll take from this episode are: Hemang gets us. He's been in our shoes, and that makes all the difference in his willingness and ability to help GCs be successful. And second, it's good to be one of his kids. They get to travel to faraway places and hang out for an extra week while their dad is working in one of Jones Day's 40 offices worldwide. Okay, until next time, this is Joe Scholl. For more tips on accelerating your path to becoming a world-class general counsel, visit InsideCounselAcademy.com and subscribe to our newsletter.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Becoming the GC. Whether you're preparing for the GC role or looking to sharpen your skills as a sitting general counsel, we hope this episode offered valuable insights and inspiration. If you enjoyed the conversation, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your colleagues and friends. Explore more resources and join our community at InsideCounselAcademy.com. Please tune in next time for more insights and inspiring stories from successful legal leaders.